In this video, I'm gonna show you the most simple and versatile dough that I've ever made. I call it the everything dough. It requires no stand mixer, it only takes 5 active minutes of work, and it can be made into pretty much anything you can think of. Today, I'm gonna show you the 5 best ways to use it, including one way that's truly special. It's an item that seems impossible to make well at home, but it's not, and I'm gonna show you an easy way to get it done. To get started, we need to mix up the everything dough. For that, into a roughly 6-quart high-sided lidded container, I'll add in 450 grams of warm water. Starting with warm water gets the fermentation off to a vigorous start, and as a result, gives it the life that it needs to stay active in the fridge. Next, I'll add in 7 grams of instant yeast, which is 1 packet's worth. Dry active yeast will also work as a direct sub here, but I like instant because it gets the fermentation started much faster. Next in goes 20 grams of sugar, 20 grams of olive oil, 15 grams of salt, and then 680 grams of all-purpose flour. Once the ingredients are inside the bucket, I'm gonna jump in with a sturdy spoon and stir to get things combined. And after about 15 seconds, the flour will have drank up most of the water and the dough will come together into a lumpy mess that you just can't stir anymore. So from here, I need to get my hand soaking wet and finish mixing the dough by jumping in and squeezing to bring everything together. At this point, we're not going to be able to develop any gluten, so don't even try. We just want to get it to the point where it's hydrated flour. Once brought together, the dough is going to be extremely weak because we haven't linked up any of the gluten proteins with mechanical force. That's totally okay. All of the gluten development is going to come from fermentation later on. Next, I'll pop on a lid, then set it aside for 25 minutes. With no knead doughs, I like to give the dough a short spurt of fermentation up front at room temperature so that the yeast can culture the dough and start to party a little bit before I slow things down with the refrigerator. 25 minutes later, when I check back, you can see things in the bucket have risen by about 50% and the flour looks a lot more hydrated. From here, I'm going to throw this bucket into the fridge to ferment it overnight. But Brian, I don't want to wait that long. Okay, well, you can continue to ferment this dough at room temperature for 90 more minutes and you'll have a workable, no knead dough at that point. But be warned, this dough is going to be a little bit trickier to shape because it'll be weaker and it will also have 50% less flavor at least. On the flip side, you can use this dough after it's been in the fridge for up to 7 days. It only gets more flavorful.
Ooh, that's strong. It's got an alcoholic smell to it. It's very boozy and it's almost like overripe fruit.
Having a dough with that much leeway in the fermentation is very convenient. After the initial 25 minutes of fermentation, you just throw this thing in the fridge and come back at some point in the next few days when you got a hankering for something bready. For reference, here's a loaf of bread that I made with 7-day-old dough, and here's a pizza I made with 8-day-old dough. Old dough tastes great, but it's a little bit tricky to shape because that much fermentation degrades the gluten network. For me, between 24 and 48 hours is usually the sweet spot. Okay, back at the main character dough. As you can see, overnight in the fridge, it rose about 2.5 times, and now it's full of gas bubbles. If you're wondering where all that gluten development came from, well, it's a combination of just letting the dough sit hydrated for an extended period of time, and the dough getting stretched out from the gas bubbles being produced by the yeast. At this point, the dough is pretty much on par with a stand mix dough in terms of strength, and it can be made into whatever we want now. Let's start with a big dog loaf of bread. This is a really easy and very rewarding way to use this dough. To make it, I'll flip the overnight everything dough onto a lightly floured surface, then I'll pull the dough outwards left and right by about 6 inches or so, then I'll fold over the left side and then fold over the right. There we go. Whoops. I bumped the camera. Anyways, once it's folded over, I'm gonna grab the other corners and repeat the same thing. Pull out, fold over left, tap down, then fold over right. And then I've got 2 more corners here, which I'll pull out until I meet resistance, then fold over and push down. At this point, we've got some tension in the loaf, so I'm gonna flip it over onto those folded seams, then switch over to a tuck and roll maneuver where I'm using the cutting board to grip the bottom of the dough as I turn clockwise while tucking the dough underneath to create even more tension. I'll run this off 20 to 30 more times until the dough has a tight skin that isn't sticky or shaggy and it holds itself up easily. Next, I'll grab a proofing basket or a tea towel lined 10-inch bowl, then I'll hit the basket with a generous dose of flour and I'll dust the loaf to make double sure it doesn't stick. Then I'll drop my loaf into the basket with the seam side facing up. Now to proof this loaf, I'm going to put it into a warm place, which is usually my oven with the light turned on. It's about 80 to 86 F in here. Or I've also got a proofing box, which is honestly a pretty great single-use tool that I used to think was stupid until I got one. Most people's houses are too cold for proofing and then they have to wait all day for their bread to rise. And this just provides an environment that eliminates the variable of temperature and makes your bread rise much faster. About 45 minutes later, I'm going to grab a Dutch oven. For baking bread, I like to use a high mileage semi-damaged Dutchie because the high heat that we need for baking degrades the enamel. If you don't have a sacrificial Dutch oven and you want to bake bread on a regular basis, I would recommend getting this Logic combo cooker. So to preheat this Dutch oven, I'll grab out the bread, then drop in my pot and heat it at 480 for 25 minutes. 25 minutes later, after about an hour and 15 minutes of proofing, you can see this loaf has risen by about 75 to 100%, and when I poke, it slowly pushes itself back out. Next, I'll hit this loaf with semolina flour, then drop that semolina into the pot, then I'll carefully flip in the dough. Ooh, also I went a little overboard with the flour earlier and now there's too much on top, so I'm gonna take a little pastry brush and dust that off because no one wants a floury, dusty crust. And then from here, I'm gonna take some scissors and score this loaf 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times to create an opening for it to rise through in the oven. Okay, once scored up, I'm gonna load the Dutch oven into my oven, lid on, and bake at 480 for 20 minutes. 20 minutes later, when I pull this thing out, oh! The scissor cuts gave us a beautiful, wild looking rip on the top of this loaf. Next, the Dutch oven goes back in and I'll bake it lid off for another 25 to 35 minutes, depending on how dark you like the crust. I like mine pretty dark though. So about 32 minutes later, I'm gonna carefully pull the bread and slide it onto a wire rack to cool down. Look at this thing. That's a pretty loaf of bread that's probably better than what you can buy in most US grocery stores. And when I cut into it, you can really hear how crispy it is. The crumb, if you're wondering, is pretty basic. It's not wild and crazy and super open like a high hydration sourdough loaf would be, but that's not the point. This is a utility bread that you bake to have something crunchy, yeasty, and fresh to dip into stuff or make into sandwiches. Now let's taste it. The crust is crunchy, a little bit chewy, and just tastes like nice bread. This is a very simple type of thing that pretty much anybody could put together, and I like serving this at dinner parties. So I just pull the dough out a couple hours before people come over, whip it up into a loaf, bake it off, and then people are really impressed when they have something fresh and crunchy to wipe through olive oil or to dip into a soup or a stew. Up next, I'm gonna show you how to make this dough into a simple, beautiful baguette. Again, we'll start with a dough that's gotten one night in the fridge. To make it baguette, I'll flip it out onto a floured surface and cut it down into 4 pieces that are just shy of 300 grams each. Ooh, by the way, this is the prototype of the scale that I'm designing. At this point, it's a low fidelity pre-production model, but you get the idea. If you wanna know about it when it comes out, sign up for my email list linked in the description. Next, I need to pre-shape this dough so that I can easily stretch it out into a long tube. So I'll fold in the sides once, then flip over onto the seam and roll it up tight, just like I did for the larger loaf by using the table to create some extra tension. Once I've got all 4 of these pre-shaped, I'm gonna cover with a damp towel and rest for 15 minutes. 15 minutes later, this dough is relaxed and ready to be rolled. So to do that, I'm gonna start with a light dusting of flour, then drop the dough with the bottom side facing up, then I'll punch it down slightly with my fingertips to remove excessive gas and to flatten things a bit. And once I've got it a little bit more square shaped like this, I'm gonna start at the top and roll this thing down towards myself 1 inch at a time. Each time I roll it over, I'm gonna be pushing down and away from myself to seal in the fold and to create more tension. Halfway through, I'll tuck in the sides to clean those up. Then I'll roll 2 or 3 more times and roll it with my palms to get it brought into a tube shape that's about 6 to 8 inches long. From here, I'll use my thumbs and the pads of my pointer fingers to roll with some more downward pressure back and forth. And now I've got it a little bit wider. So I'll switch to my palms and gently roll this out a little bit more. And once I'm at about 12 inches, I'm gonna start to press nice and hard on the edges to create a taper. Once I've got these baggies shaped up, I'm gonna drop them seam side down onto a parchment paper that I've sprayed with pan spray. Then I'll drop on a lid or a damp towel and proof these for 45 to 60 minutes at room temperature. If you're concerned about your ability to shape a perfect tube like I just did, consider a perforated baguette pan. This acts as kind of like bread training wheels, and it provides a form factor to keep the baguette more or less tube shaped. Okay, after 45 to 60 minutes of proofing, the baguettes are buoyant and gassed up, and they bounce back when I gave them a poke. From here, I'm gonna use a serrated knife to make 4 slices down each baguette at a 45-degree angle. If you don't have a serrated knife, I would make a scissor cut every 4 inches, just like we did for the first loaf. Okay, once this is scored, I'm gonna spritz it with a little water to create extra steam. Then I'll cover it with a foil pan lid, then move the whole thing over to a 450 oven and bake it for 15 minutes lid on. 15 minutes later, I'm gonna come back and pop off the lid. And as you can see, these rose beautifully and they're standing tall. Now I'm gonna slide this back in and bake until golden and crispy, which should take about 15 more minutes. And after about 30 minutes of bake time, these look great. Oh dog, look at these things.
Whew, that's hot, but it looks so good.
Look at that crust color. You only get that special red, gold, orange color on a baguette that's been properly fermented overnight. Now let's taste it.
Yeah, that tastes good. It looks really good too. Does it taste as good as a Parisian style baguette that you'd get in Paris or a big city like New York or Tokyo? No, but is it a nice tube-shaped piece of bread? For sure, and anybody would be or should be happy with this.
Up next, we're gonna turn this dough into a pizza. But first, I need to thank Trade Coffee for sponsoring this vid. Trade is the #1 US coffee subscription service, and it connects me to a huge selection of regular and decaf coffees that taste great. All of these coffees come from over 50 of the country's top local roasters. They're always roasted to order, they're ground exactly how you like to drink them, and they're shipped directly to your door. As some of you guys know, I'm primarily a decaf drinker, and if you've ever messed around with standard issue store-bought decaf coffee, you'll know that it's bland and doesn't taste very good. I don't know what it is, but they don't work for people who love the taste of good coffee, like me. That's why I love using Trade. My latest bag is this after hours decaf from Highwire Coffee. The flavor is deep and interesting, but overall it's still chill and smooth enough to drink an entire pot of it, like I do pretty much every morning. If you're unsure about what coffees you might like, you can take Trade's online quiz. There, they'll match you with coffees that you love. If you don't love them though, they'll replace your coffee for free. Right now, Trade is exclusively offering you guys 50% off your 1-month trial over at drinktrade.com/Brian. That's drinktrade.com/Brian for 50% off your 1-month trial. Thank you, Trade. Okay, time to make a little pizza. Just like for the baguettes, I'm gonna flip the dough out and divide it into 4 roughly 300 gram size pieces. Then I'll pre-shape that dough into balls. But for pizza, you want your balls to be a little bit looser. If you round these up too tight, you're gonna have a really hard time getting them stretched back out into a 12-inch pizza disc. Once I got these things pre-shaped, I'm gonna move all 4 balls over to a pan-sprayed sheet tray, then cover with a lid or a damp towel and let rest for 30 to 40 minutes. At this point, I'm also gonna preheat my oven to its highest setting, which for me is 550F. When I come back, these dough balls are ready to rip. They've gassed up by about 40%, and they're really nice and relaxed and should be pretty easy to stretch out. To shape this into a pizza, I'll grab a dough ball, flip it over so the sheet tray side is facing up, then I'll lightly degas it to remove any big bubbles or weak spots. Then, using the pads of my fingers to press down, I'm gonna go about a 1/2 inch inside the edge of the dough, all the way around to start building the crust. I'm also gonna use the back of my hand to degas the middle here because you don't want any large bubbles rising up to make a pizza volcano in the middle of the pizza. Once I've got it pushed out to about 8 inches with an outer edge of crust, I'm gonna pull out with my left hand and fold it over my right to stretch this out even more. If you guys want a more detailed explainer on exactly how to stretch out a pizza crust by hand, then I recommend checking out my easiest pizza dough video, linked in description. You could also use a rolling pin for this if you're a total beginner and you don't mind not having a tall bready crust. Okay, once I've got this rolled out to about 10 or 11 inches, it's time to build it. Okay, the dough gets flipped onto my arm, then I'll drop my pizza loading peel onto my cutting board and dust it with a very generous dose of semolina flour. Then I'll carefully lay my crust down on top of that. If you're wondering about subbing in all-purpose for semolina here, don't. It'll burn. Now I'll drop a 1/2 cup dollop of standard issue pizza sauce into the middle, then spread that out, leaving about 1 inch around the edges. Next, I'll grab 2 big handfuls of grated full-fat mozzarella cheese and drop that on top of the sauce. And then finally, I'll drop on some thick sliced ronis. The last step is to pull this pizza out just a little bit more with your fingers to spread it out from about 10 to 11 inches to 12 to 13. Now I'm gonna give this one more shimmy to make sure that she's loose on the peel. Then I'm gonna drop this pie into a 550F oven and bake it for 6 to 10 minutes. Bake times vary widely here, just don't be shy. If you want a pizza with a nice crispy bite and a well-set crust, you gotta bake it hard, baby. When I pull it out,
ooh, that's a pizza, baby.
That looks almost like AI-generated pizza. I mean, look at that pepperoni cupping. Also, this pizza has 0 floppiness. That means that we got a pro-level deep bake on the crust. Now let's taste it.
Dude, I keep waiting to find an application that this dough doesn't work for. You'd think there'd be something where it's like, oh, it's weird, it doesn't quite work out. Nope, this is amazing pizza.
Up next is a bread that I was shocked actually worked with this dough. bagels. To make these, I'll snatch a bucket of everything dough out of the fridge, then cut it down into 8 150-gram pieces. Then I'll pre-shape by pressing out a little bit of the gas, fold in the corners, then I'll flip those over and roll into a tidy little ball. Since bagels are defined by their chewiness, when I'm doing the pre-shape here, I'm gonna add in about 30 to 40 seconds of extra work to develop a little bit more gluten. That's gonna mean more chewiness in the final bagel, and it will also make the dough easier to shape. This dough has about 10% more water than a traditional bagel dough, so without this extra development, it can be a little bit sticky. Once I've got 8 balls rolled up, I'm gonna drop a damp towel and then mosey over to the sink and get a full pot of water and drop it on the stove. Next, I'll add in a lazy drizzle of molasses, or about 50 grams worth. The molasses brings a little bit of extra shine and additional subtle sweetness that's nice to have, but if you don't stock it in your pantry, sub in honey. Okay, after a 15-minute rest time, I'll grab a bagel ball, then place it bottom side up, do a little degas to prepare it for the rollout. Then just like I did for the baguettes, I'm gonna fold it back down towards myself to get it tucked up into a tight little tube. This time I'm looking for about 4 inches, not 8. Then I'm gonna take my palms and gently put downward pressure while rolling out towards the edges of my cutting board. Yeah, at this point, that little bit of extra rolling really comes through and this thing feels pretty sturdy. When I'm at about 8 to 10 inches wide, I'm gonna wrap the dough around my hand like so, then overlap the tippy parts by 2 inches, then give the seam a hard squeeze to seal things up. Then I'll roll this bagel on the table to make it even more sealed. Next, I'm gonna scoot all 8 bagels over to a lubed up sheet tray, then move over to my boiling molasses water to blanch these things. From here, I'm gonna carefully drop in 4 bagels, then snug the other 4 up into the fridge covered so they don't get too gassy while I bake these ones. I'm gonna boil these first 4 bagels with the first side down for 15 seconds, then I'm gonna use my spider or a spoon to flip them over and boil them quickly on the backside for another 15 to 20. Once out of the water, I'm gonna move them directly into some seeds. I've got untoasted sesame here, but sub in everything or poppy seed if you like, or go plain if you're one of those people. Then I'll give them a quick flip and get seeds crusted up all over the backside. Now comes the special part. Once I've got these totally covered, I'm gonna grab 2 soaking wet bagel boards and drop my bagels on them with the bottom side facing up. This burlap creates steam, which helps the bagels rise, but it also keeps the bagels off the hot baking steel during the first part of the bake, which keeps the seeds on the bottom from burning. 5 minutes later, I'll come back and flip the bagels over right onto the baking steel. Now the top side is facing up. Also, things are well set now, so the risk of the seeds burning is mostly gone. From here, I'll bake for another 15 minutes. After about 20 minutes of total bake time, I'm gonna pull these out and drop them onto a wire rack. Look at the bagels that you got in your pantry or fridge right now, then look at these things. Tell me which one you'd rather eat. I'm willing to bet the lenders you've been gumming down for years are starting to disappoint and you're ready for something fresh. You're worth it. Do it.
Man, this bagel is really chewy considering we didn't need it. Most bagel recipes that I've done in the past require a minimum of 10 minutes of strict elbow grease or 10 minutes in a stand mixer to come close to having enough resistance to be called chewy. Cold fermentation did the majority of the work here. Flavor-wise, it's got a nice yeasty breadiness throughout, it's got some toasted seeds on the outside, and it's a little bit crispy on the outside, which is awesome.
Finally, we've gotten to the crown jewel of this video, and in my opinion, it's the best way to use this dough, a salty, soft pretzel. To start, I'll pull my dough out of the fridge and cut it down into 8 150-gram pieces, just like we did for the bagels. Next, I'll need to pre-shape the dough so that I can eventually roll it out to 24 inches wide. But first, I need to dust the dough with a little flour, then degas slightly and press into a rectangle-ish shape. Then I'll fold towards myself 3 or 4 times, then I'll roll this into an 8-inch cigar shape. Once I've got 8 tubes, I need to let them rest for 10 minutes. In the meantime, I'll grab 2 kilos of water and drop it on the stove and bring it up to a boil. I'll also add in about 225 grams of baking soda. Right now you're thinking, what the heck? But baking soda makes things more alkaline, and we need a very alkaline environment to get these pretzels flavor, color, and texture dialed in. Next, I'll get back to my rested pre-shaped pretzel tubes and then roll them out so that they're wide enough to twist. Before twisting these, I'll need a roughly 24-inch length of dough that's about 2 inches in the middle and a ½ inch towards the ends. Next, I'll grab the tips, stretch them out, then fold the left side over the right to create a Jesus fish type shape. Then I'll take the ends and flip them up towards the top and press press into the middle sides of the pretzel like this. Once I've got about 8 pretzels laid out on 2 sprayed sheet trays, I'm gonna drop them 2 at a time for 15 to 20 seconds in my boiling soda bath. This process happens really quick, so you gotta stay frosty. 10 seconds in, I'm gonna come back with a spider, then I'll flip the pretzels, then I'll boil them on the backside for 10 to 15 more seconds max, and then move over to a well-sprayed sheet tray to hang for a sec while I drop 2 more. Also, I'm only cooking 1 sheet tray's worth of these pretzels. I'm gonna put the other 4 in my fridge covered until I want fresh pretzels again. These will stay good in here for about 3 more days before the dough gets lifeless and flat. And after I've got all 4 of my pretzels boiled up, I'm gonna hit them liberally with flaky salt. Don't be shy with it. Then to bake these things, I'm gonna load them into my oven at 425F and rip for 18 to 22 minutes. And after 20 minutes, when I pull these out, you can see these pretzels are filthy. The browning is deep, there's plentiful crunchy salt, and they've risen really high. And the smell is insane. It's like roasty and almost metallic. Every time I smell this, my mouth waters so hard because it knows what's coming.
Absolutely psychotic. If you've never had a fresh baked pretzel before, you don't know what you're missing. The stuff at the mall, fine, those are pretty good, but this smokes that, dude, by a mile. There's just layers of flavor here. It's super salty. The outside's got a little bit of resistance. You really can't even understand how good it is until you've tried it yourself. It's that good. Oh my God.
Let me know down in the comments what creative ideas you guys have for using this dough in other ways, and let me know which recipes in this video you want to make soon. If you guys want to watch another video that's similar to this one, I'll link it on the screen right here. I'll see you there.